Hi,
Hi.
how's it going?
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. I feel like everybody's melancholy on this app, and so I kind of got nostalgic and was like, maybe we should do TikTok one last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because everybody's been so doom and gloom.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like we have to because we met because of this app.
Yeah.
How can we not acknowledge it somehow?
I mean, maybe that's like a good chunk of what we could talk about because there's
Mm-hmm.
not a ton of show news as far as I know. Yeah, like a ton of stuff came about Walker's birthday, and then we're probably not going to get anything for a few weeks, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Oh, one thing we could talk about a little bit was just like that comment that Becky was talking about. She was talking about Becky left she replied to somebody on Threads where they were just asking about speculation stuff, like how speculation works, or like is it helpful or harmful or whatever.
Yeah.
It basically said like speculation is mostly fun except when it gets really toxic.
Yep.
And then it's not fun anymore. And I saw that and I was like, yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I always think about,
Mhm.
like to make sure that we're talking about it in like a fun place and not like a crazy place or like a bad place or something that could possibly hurt the people involved, because she was talking about it saying like the people in our cast are not used to this sort of like toxicity and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's just like an interesting line for people to be walking, and I'm not sure that some people know that they're walking it, but they are. And so it's just one of the, I always think about that kind of stuff of like, I don't want anything I ever say to make any of these literal children feel weird or bad or have it somehow like reflect badly on them. Because that's not necessary. They don't need that.
Yeah, there's going to be enough of that, like from everybody else. And in terms of speculation for the seasons, I feel like we try to keep it fun. And we try to be realistic about the fact that they're going to want to do more than was done in the books, especially this season, because, we're kind of getting a Team Luke versus Team Clarice, Team Percy, whatever we want to call it, because, I mean, it is Clarice's quest. But yeah, it's just like it's fun to think of things like I know I had a video kind of get a little bit of the Percy Jackson community going about the soldiers that are on Clarice's boat. It's fun to speculate. Okay, are they going to keep it Confederate soldiers, or are they going to like change it and make it something that I don't know makes more sense or feels a little bit more in line with how they're doing the show versus how Rick wrote the books in 2009 or like maybe even 2008 or 2007 for this one in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a really long time ago. And it's also the stuff I try to like keep to where I like don't do it at all really, or we never do this kind of thing really, but it's the thing where people like speculate about things going on in the show because of what the kids post on social media.
Oh yeah.
That's the stuff that I feel like is really toxic. Like when Beatrice, who is playing Allison, like when she showed up in videos and pictures and stuff that like Charlie and Dior were posting because they were just like hanging out, then like that made people start to speculate that she was Rachel. she's obviously she's obviously not Rachel, but they started speculating that she was involved in the show because they just posted pictures of them all hanging out and having fun. And it's like that sort of a thing of like you can think about that, but it's, I just always think of like I can think about stuff, but I need to say it out loud? I guess is like the thing I'm trying to say is that I don't need to say that stuff out loud all the time, because it's like what would that do? Like me speculating about that would just put pressure on the audience, like on them, like on the actors for sharing that, and I don't want them to feel like that. I want them to be able to post whatever the hell they want on social media and be able to share a little bit like normal people do when they're just out with their friends when they're young. And so that's the kind of stuff that I think about of like people like read into all these things that they're posting. And like they're just posting stuff because they're kids. They're teenagers and this is what people do. They like having fun and like sharing it with people. They know that we like seeing this stuff and so they want to share it with us too. But it's like that kind of a thing of like it's fine to like enjoy those things, but to like read into the stuff they say or don't say as it could possibly mean something about like the direction of the show is the stuff that it gets like weird. Uh, and like just I know every time I see that I'm like I know some Disney person is like having discussions with them because that's just what it's like when you're involved with a huge production with a huge studio like this. And and that's the kind of stuff I think about of that I think beyond like the racist shit that's obvious of how toxic that stuff is. I think that's kind of the general thing that Becky was talking about, which is why whenever there's rumors about who somebody is in the show, she tends to just say it like, no, Sage is not Selena, she's somebody else.
Yeah.
Like the funniest one of that was when somebody is like, I think she might be Cersei, and she just wrote no. That was it, one word, no, and moved on. And I'm like, good job. You don't need to spend too much time thinking about any of that. But it's like that kind of stuff can get to like a wild place because then people start speculating all these things based on the idea that they think this like 20-year-old girl is gonna play Cersei and it's not accurate in the first place. So it's like I have to stop this now before it gets to a place where she gets any sort of like bad attention because people think that she's playing a character that she's not even playing.
Yeah.
And so that's like the stuff that I think about. But we talk about all that all the time with child actor stuff. It's just, but it is that sort of a thing of like, you need to turn off like analysis, like thinking sometimes, and just let them be somewhat normal people.
Yeah, like the ones that get us especially are when people make speculations about the castmates' relationships, which like that's definitely way different than making speculations about the show in general.
Yeah, yeah, like the cast. Like we talked about how they got rid of Andrew Alvarez for doing I didn't even know how inappropriate some of that stuff was because I didn't read all of the comments because I didn't like honestly I didn't want to. But
Yeah,
going back and looking at it now that I know he's gone, reading that he sent a picture of him shirtless when he was swimming to a 13-year-old girl.
that's questionable for sure.
Very, what are you doing, sir? That's very questionable when he was, and a lot of those comments, they thought that he wasn't 18. And I was like, I'm pretty sure he lied to these kids and told them that he wasn't 18 yet when he was 20.
Yeah, like trying to blend in with the younger castmates or something.
Yeah, I think he was like getting away with the fact that he looked younger and they just thought that he was younger than he was and he just like didn't question any of them when they thought that he was 17 when he was 20. But like with that sort of a situation, like a lot of the cast still follow him on social media. That doesn't actually mean anything.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't mean anything. They just never went back and unfollowed him because if they do, that could create like more of a situation of people noticing that and like wondering why that happened. So it's better to just not do anything at all sometimes. Um, and so it's that kind of a thing of like I don't think any of them care that much about whatever he's doing when they've obviously moved on without him. As like harsh as that sounds, I don't care because you're a fucking weirdo.
Yeah.
Or if I sound mean to you, you're very inappropriate. I need to do something about that before you get in trouble.
Yeah.
Like he's in school to be a psychologist right now. That's interesting.
Hopefully, this is just like he'll learn better type situation because we know there's not really a trusted way to hold him accountable, like at this point.
There never is.
So we just gotta hope he grows out of it.
Yeah, hopefully. Um, what was I gonna? Okay, so besides that, like I thought that was a good thing for Becky to bring up because that's the kind of stuff that I spend way too much time thinking about. Just because I don't know, I just want to be careful when there's, especially when it's a show involving kids. I'm careful about. I try to be careful about like literally everything I ever do because they're kids. Um, but I feel like we should say something about TikTok stuff just
Mhm.
because it's not going to be around in a week when we do our next thing.
Yeah, I know there's still people holding out hope, but like I don't know. I don't think that at this point it's gonna get saved. I mean, at least before it goes offline for a while. So yeah.
I really don't think it's going to. It's one of those things of knowing like how people act like when that are controlling like this, like them immediately putting out stories in like the I don't know, legacy news is what people call them, like the NBC and things like that, saying that the Supreme Court is going to ban TikTok on like and that was it and saying like that TikTok said they're just going to. The thing about it is that TikTok, I'm glad honestly that they've said this because I'm glad that they're showing that they're not willing to like play any of these games that they're trying to play because this whole thing, I guess the thing that is most important to say is that it's not like anyone in our government cares that much about this app. Yes, Mark Zuckerberg is their little bitch baby, and he doesn't actually have any actual creativity anywhere in his brain. Like, I don't know if people, I think people forgot about this sort of thing, but he stole the technology of how to make Facebook from somebody who thought he was his friend. That's what the Social Network movie was about. And he stole that technology so that he could rate girls at Harvard and say which ones he thought was hot or not because nobody wanted to date him. Like that's the dude we're talking about. The only thing he made money off of was things he stole from someone else. He's not actually that smart. He doesn't actually have any good like creative ideas. He could never come up with an app like TikTok. He just copies other apps that are already out there. And so he wants to make more money and he wants to force people to get off of this app and spend more time on his. That's a like a whatever motivation. But most of it is just that they want to be able to control the social media that is out there. And TikTok is the first app that's owned by somebody who's a foreign like company that isn't like Elon Musk who is like, you know, like becoming BFF with Trump right now and is like willing to like wants to work with like the administrations and stuff. They don't want to. Why would they? And so I honestly kind of appreciate the fact that they've said that if they get banned, that they're just going to delete all of our servers. And so that basically means that it's just gone. Like that's why all of the videos people are posting talking about VPNs and stuff. It doesn't matter if you have a VPN. You literally have to get like a SIM card or a phone not from the United States. Because because the servers are going to be deleted, if that happens, then if your phone is connected, if your the number that is connected to your TikTok account is an American phone number, it doesn't matter. You're never going to be able to access it because it's just going to be gone. They're just going to delete them and it's like weird to think about people still on this app and imagining like all of the content that we all made just being gone because that's what would essentially happen. It would all just like disappear. Um, but that's likely what is going to happen. And them putting out all those news stories right away saying that they're going to ban it and that's it was, to tell us, to warn us beforehand so we would know. Um, I never thought that Trump or anyone else would ever save the app. I thought that he would pretend like he could so that he could try to say that he tried to save it, but other people just wouldn't listen to him. It's like that sort of a thing that people like him tend to do.
Yeah.
But I did at least want to talk about it just because it is scary. It's really when you get past like the fun pettiness we're doing right now, it's it's just like really scary to imagine that the U.S. government can just take something like that away from its people. that it's purely just a way for us to communicate. It's not doing anything else.
Yeah.
Because it makes you wonder with him as president what other things like that he would take down. Because if they could take down this huge of an app, other like websites and things like that would be like not even that hard. And so I'm just thinking of like all like the trans or queer friendly like nonprofits or websites or foundations or whatever. All of those could possibly be just like erased from the internet. If they could erase TikTok from the internet, that wouldn't even be that hard after something like this. Um, but I did at least want to talk about a little bit of our time on. I don't know if we've, just for people who only know of us on YouTube or don't know like our backstory or whatever. I don't know if we've ever mentioned it like that, like how we even became friends, but we met on TikTok.
Yeah, so and I feel like this is a really funny thing to mention, even just because I mean like the last few weeks on this app have been crazy for us. But how we met was I was blowing up because I had seemingly introduced a bunch of people to the term emotional incest when there was a bunch of boy mom like content kind of up in the air, or at least hitting my algorithm. I haven't seen it as much. I'm sure it's still out there. Maybe it's all on Instagram and I'll find it later. But regardless, I because I was the first person to introduce people to this term, emotional incest or covert incest, people got upset with me for the fact that it is referred to as that, but it's not sexual contact between you and your family. And so I was trying to explain, like the reason it's called that is because psychologically it does the same shit to your brain. And you stitched me. And you stitched me basically calling those people out and being like, hi, I'm a victim of actual incest. And like, what do you think they do first? Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, what do you think our emotional relationship is like with our abusers?
Yeah, that I always think that. It's funny to remember back then because I was almost 4 years ago. It was like 2 weeks from now, like it was like the very beginning of February when I joined TikTok 4 years ago. Um, and but yeah, I've always had that opinion about that because it is true that there is the emotional incest stuff is the grooming. That's like what that is grooming, and that's like the how when you're being groomed for that, that's how they groom you, is by making you feel like responsible for their happiness and things like that. And so the emotional side could never exist, like could never not exist if you have like the physical stuff going on. And so I talked about this even in 2019 when I went to like a treatment program for all of this stuff. There was somebody in my treatment program that went through the physical stuff with her stepdad, and she didn't like somebody saying, bringing up like emotional incest, like in like our group or our class. I don't know what to call it when you're in the same group in like a rehab place like that. But and I said even back then I was like, no, it's the exact. It's sometimes harder because the physical stuff, it's very obvious when you remember that stuff to know that that was wrong and that was bad. That's why those things like will never like. There's a couple things that would never leave my brain no matter how much I tried, because I could never fully forget them, and they were only like two tiny little memories that survived all that time until I got old enough to remember more. But it's still like they were there because I knew they were wrong. Like when it's just like emotional stuff like that, there's nothing like definitive that you can like point at. And so I feel like the like gaslighting and like the games that you play with your own mind, like gaslighting yourself, is like super intense for that part of it, because you just there's nothing there that you can point at and be like, I know that that was wrong. And that makes it a lot harder and more complicated. And so I remember it was that Olivia Rodrigo trend, that one song, and you and like the one video that exploded for you. I saw it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna follow this person. And then I saw in like the follow up videos that you were like just going no contact with your mom, and I had been no contact with mine by that point for like 2 years, like 2.5 years, something like that. And so I was like, oh, it's really hard in the beginning. So I'm gonna like follow this person to see just to see how it's like going, see if it like I can be helpful at all because of how hard that stuff is. So then when that person was, I could like literally see you feeling like insecure about it, and I was just like, no. Like I'm not doing this. And I always think it's like amazing that you listen to me at all because I had like 400 followers at that time and you had a lot more, so I was always like, why did you even listen to me? But I'm obviously glad that you did.
First one that blew up too. So I think that that's where I gained a significant amount of those followers. Um, but and I will say this is why I get mad at the trolls is because I did have to watch her video a couple times before I was like, okay, she's not angry at me. Like she's angry at the other people. And actually, if I take a second to like stop feeling, like scared everybody's angry at me, I actually like have never heard someone put it this way. So that's why I was like, okay, we're putting this on my profile, which I think not as many people saw that, of course, because I think the features were like terrible back then, and either I wasn't able to like stitch enough of it or duet enough of it, something like that. And so I had to like download it and green screen it or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just remember like geez, I've never thought of it this way. And then as your content started showing on my feed and you were talking about your trauma, again, like things about being a childhood victim of incest, just like I would never think of, that I would never stop and like, oh shit, like that's what the family dynamics are like outside of this, or that's what it actually feels like, or that's what, you know, happens in these kinds of relationships. Because I think a lot of us don't want to go there in our brains.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I think that it's just one of those funny things that it's funny to think that that's how we met, but it's very like me specific that I just like yelled at someone because I was feeling protective of a stranger, but because I knew what it was like when you're in the beginning stages of all that stuff of how insecure you feel about everything that you're doing because there so many people have told you not to by that point in your life that it's easy to just like start second guessing yourself. Like all of the craziness that's happened in the last couple weeks, if it was like even like 6 months ago and that stuff happened, I would have just like deleted everything and just would have done whatever they said right away. I wouldn't have been able to listen to all those people say that I was wrong and be like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Like, I know that I'm not. I don't want you to harass me about this, but I know that I'm not wrong. And I'm not just gonna like give in and like just because you want to like forcibly change my opinion, I'm not gonna do that. Like at it like before like the last couple months I would have, but not anymore. I feel confident enough about that now not to do that. But it is just like a funny thing. Like sometimes I wonder what people think. Like we've never actually met in person. I don't know if people know that.
Yeah. It's because
We're-
we're poor.
yeah, yeah. Like I was unemployed for the entire year basically last year. You've been unemployed for a while. Even when I was employed, it's not like I have a lot of money. Like the goal that we're gonna do sometime this year is to meet up somewhere. I when I saw my family yesterday, my mom was like, "Oh, so why do you guys want to do like Percy Jackson road trips?" And I'm like, "Because there's a lot of places to go when we want to hang out in person."
Yeah.
That's
It's like
literally
basically
it.
all over the US. Like you can pick any spot within the US. If there's a landmark there, there's probably a Percy Jackson equivalent of like a temple or something.
Mhm. There's always something, and so it's weird to. It's like a weird thing to think that we met on here, became friends on here, been friends for all this time on here. Like it took a long time for us to actually get to know each other because we were both terrified. We both like were talking more about our own personal stuff and then realized pretty quickly how horrible that feels.
Yeah.
Like feeling like you're turning your trauma into like a weird social media commodity. And like I've always known since I was on here like what I had to do in order to get a lot of attention. It would have been very easy, honestly, with the sort of history that I have, but I never wanted to do that. It just felt like disgusting treating myself like a sideshow act. And so instead we just kind of floated around for a while until we found other things. Like I've always used media to talk about this stuff. When I first got on the app, I used to talk about like Bucky and Marvel a lot for the same kind of themes.
Mhm.
It's just an easy way, and all of that stuff is mythology in some way.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's all like connected in some way. We just ended up here eventually. I think it's so funny to remember when like the Percy Jackson show and stuff was announced. And I remember telling you how excited I was about it like 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and how watching like the trailer for the first time made me cry and all that kind of stuff. And I just like ignored it until I could watch the entire thing because I was like, this is too important that if it's not what I want it to be, I'll like cry because I'm really sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so it is like a weird thing to think that the app that we met on like won't exist anymore.
Mhm.
Um, I do think about trauma victims, survivors, whatever you want to call yourselves, like us, where this is like a place where we can talk about that stuff without having to worry about anyone who's ever met us before
Yeah.
seeing it. It's a lot easier to put that stuff out into like the veritable like void on TikTok where you're just putting it out there. You don't know who's going to see it because it's all very random. Um, it's a lot harder to post it anywhere else because you know more who's going to see it. Um, and it's just a scary thing. And so this app is such a good place to you can just use like a audio and put text on the screen. You don't even have to talk, and you can just put something out there that you would never otherwise say, just to like get it out of your head, um, in a way that you can't do anywhere else. And so that's one thing I am like stressed out about where people like that who are us a couple years ago are gonna go
Yeah.
to find that because I first found like a sex abuse like chat on Twitter, but that's not usable anymore because of Elon. They definitely don't do that anymore. They used to do like a weekly chat for people, and I would just read it. Like I would never like anything or reply to anything. I just would read it for like months so that nobody who follows me would know. But
Yeah.
you can do something like that, just like reading a live chat every week through like the hashtags on Twitter. I don't know what else. I don't know what people are going to do after this besides wait for something else to come up that can probably really badly, um, and like take its place, like how all the weird apps showed up after Vine was gone, and
Mhm.
that none of them ever survived, but they were just kind of there for the interim. Like
Yeah.
it is weird. This is all very weird. It's
Yeah.
just strange. It's just strange to think about the people that I know from here that I've interacted with in some way for years. That now I don't know how I'm going to talk to them anymore. Like it's just so weird. Even like the people that watch our Percy Jackson stuff, they've been watching it for almost a year now, and now I have no idea if any of those people are ever going to see us ever again
Yeah.
after in less than a week.
Yeah. I mean, if you guys happen to catch part of this, YouTube, Instagram, like those are the main places. I don't know if Lemonade's actually staying. People have confused me with that. That's also owned by ByteDance stuff, so I'm not sure.
Nobody knows. Like I stopped using CapCut in case it's because that's also owned by ByteDance.
Yeah, I thought
In
that's what it
case
was.
that like goes away too, I just started using a different app just to make it easy on myself. And with that Lemonade app, I posted a couple things on it just to have it, but nobody knows if it's gonna stay around because it depends on what the Supreme Court says.
Mhm.
They could say that everything affiliated with this company has to be gone, or they could say just TikTok or something. And
Yeah.
so I'm not really putting that much effort into it besides just having one there in case it, however long it lasts. Um, so you can find us on our YouTube and Instagram, I guess, for now. Those are places that we know won't go away.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much all we can do right now in this very weird time. Uh,
Yeah, I know a lot of people are hesitant with Instagram, especially because of Zuckerberg, but like it's the only other platform that I know how to use right now. It's not that I'd be opposed to other ones, so I'm also open to suggestions.
yeah, and also one thing I did want to say about all that is um, people are like moralizing stuff, and I need you guys to stop. And like by that I mean like people are like, oh, I'm not going to use the Red Note app because they don't allow like you to talk about queerness because that's something that you're not allowed to talk about in China. And it's like, I don't care. Like, do you understand that this is literally like your government trying to censor you? This is not like some moral. You're not going on that app because of a moral stance of you thinking that it's okay to with them to like censor all the stuff that they do. It's literally you trying to like do anything towards your government to show that you're not going to just follow along with what they want you to do.
Yeah.
So I see people being like, I'm not going to post on Meta stuff anymore because Zuckerberg like caused this to happen. And it's like, okay, but if you don't, if everyone just leaves, then the worst fucking people in the entire world are just going to be on there, and everyone is going to hear what they have to say and see what they have to say. And young kids are going to see that over and over again and get indoctrinated to it, and there won't be anybody there to give an opposing opinion or try to cut that stuff down. So like, what is the point of doing that? Like, it's it feels to me almost like an easy way to like ignore the problems that are going to happen, to be like, oh, I'm just not going to engage in it anymore. And it's like, no, you are, especially if you're an adult, like this is our responsibility to do what we can to try to protect kids that couldn't even vote in this last election to what's going to happen to their lives in the next 4 years. Like we're the adults here, we should be on all of these apps trying to like stop whatever we can with the rhetoric and narratives and things that will definitely take over, considering that Meta also said that they're going to get rid of their DEI program. They're not going to fact check anymore, and like Zuckerberg is talking about how there's too much feminine energy in his life. I'm like, is he getting divorced? Like maybe he is, but
He's getting a divorce and he's going through a midlife crisis.
he's sure doing something. But it's like that it's just gonna, they're trying to make it like how Elon does Twitter, and you can't stop that completely obviously, but you can at least try to make it as hard as possible
Yeah.
to do that and to be successful at that. I'm not just gonna leave people to having to deal with that just because I'm mad that the app that we like to use isn't here anymore. Like that won't do anything.
Yeah.
And like I was just saying about abuse victims, I just think about people like us that the internet is like the place we go to like talk to people and find community and stuff. And it's like we don't have another. I don't have another option like that. Um, I have to be online because that's like how I am able to talk to people. And so don't just like leave the people behind that don't have an option. Basically, like if it's just like super traumatized and also disabled people left on the internet being like destroyed by horrible, like really horrible, mean people, that won't be a fun time for anyone. But yeah, I guess if you're really upset about the app going away, you should be. Don't like listen too much about people trying to tell you it's not that big of a deal, because it is a big deal, even if it's just the fact that you like going here because it makes you feel good sometimes. Um, that's reason enough for you to be upset.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one platform that I think both of us have been able to feel like we're effectively telling our stories on, just because there is something to the algorithm, and I get why they don't want to sell it. I get why they don't want anyone else to have access to it. It's powerful. We've like both never had this big of a community of people who've gone through similar traumas. And I know with myself, like, I mean, when you talk about emotional incest, a good example of how people feel about it, a good litmus test, is how they feel about Rory's period of estrangement in Gilmore Girls. So when she went no contact with Lorelai for a bit because it was right after she went to jail, and she took a break from Yale. Like she dropped out for, I want to say at least I don't know if they do semesters or quarters at Yale, but at least one.
Hmm.
And she joined the DAR, lived with her grandparents, all of that. People love to forget that Lorelai was like, "You can't live with me if you're going to take a break and re-examine," even though they were about to come up on like summer break. Like she was like, "You can't live in my house," and Rory's like, "Okay, bet I'm going to go stay with Grandpa." You
Hmm.
know, and it was never Rory saying, "I'm not going to talk to you." Lorelai was the one like, "Oh, you're not going to fix this the way that I want, so I'm going to stop my feet." And even Luke was like enabling her, like, "Oh yeah, let's drag her back to Yale." It's just, I mean, I get why Rory went to her grandparents' house. I do.
Hmm.
But like, yeah, it's a litmus test for how people feel about emotional incest is how they feel about that particular estrangement.
Yeah. And there's definitely some other tests like that with other media we talk about with this stuff to see like if you don't like what I have to say about this, then why would I ever trust you with the stuff that actually matters? And I guess the stuff like the people who shall not be named stuff that was so hard about it was like they did not care. And it's just like a wild thing to see all these people know that about you and not care and also somehow find a way to make that like something bad about you. Like a lot of their like I got some random comment even today of somebody saying something like they commented on the video I made where I was talking about why I like Greek mythology or that I always see like the Greek gods as the abusers. When I was like stitching that video of that girl talking about how scary it would be for Calypso to be abusing Odysseus and that she didn't even see it like she was, and I'm like, yeah, that's literally every horrible abuser. Like that was me growing up. My dad did not think that he was abusing me at all. He thought that he was doing what he wanted and that I should be happy with it. He didn't see anything wrong with what he was doing. And it is terrifying when that happens to you. But in that video I was talking about Calypso
Yeah.
and saying like this is why I think I feel like you're like not even talking about it really if you don't talk about this other context of this story because they're obviously like the abusers. They said some like snipey comment of like, oh, so you went through some like trauma yourself and so you're being mean to him. And I'm like, this video isn't even about the suitors, it's about Calypso. Pay attention. Like I literally said, like, this is not even about that. This is about Calypso. What are you even but you're showing zero empathy to someone that you know was raped their entire childhood by their dad. Like, you know that about me, and you're using that to say that I'm being a mean person to a content creator that you've never met
And never will meet,
and
probably.
never will meet and has made a fucking fortune off of your dedication to his art. Like, what are you doing? Like, genuinely, like, what are you doing? They never came back and said anything else after that, so maybe they realized what a horrible decision that was. But
Yeah.
it is like when people, I feel so weird when I see people like talking about this stuff, and I'm like, it's to me, I'm watching this and I'm like, it's obvious this person went through this before, and but like the way that people respond to them is like they can't tell. Like one of my favorite creators when I got on very beginning of when I got on this app was talking a lot about sex trafficking and was trying to educate people about it. She's like never posts on here anymore because people like were very aggressive with her about that stuff, like threatened her and things like that, like sent things to her house kind of threatening her kind of stuff because people are so invested in the whole Underground Railroad thing that they thought that she was like working with them because she was saying that they are not telling the truth. Um, and I remember watching all those videos being like, you're a survivor of this. And then like 6 months in, she like made a video announcing it. And I was like, did other people not realize this entire time? Like I was glad she felt like she could say it. But it was just interesting that people had been watching her videos for all that time and generally didn't know that she was. And I'm like, that sort of passion doesn't just happen. That sort of passion comes from somewhere. Like you usually go through it yourself and so you know how it works, or you like know somebody who did, but most of the time it's you. Because it's like a thing where you literally physically cannot stop talking about it, or your brain will like explode out of your head. And it's like usually that happens to you when you've been through it before and you know how bad it is. Um, when knowing what people are going through and knowing that there's really nothing that you can do to stop it. And so this sort of thing is how we deal with that, by trying to do something to put stuff out there for people like us, so that they at least know that there's some people that understand this stuff. And I don't know what else to do but use media stuff to try to help kids realize when they're being groomed, or just pointing out to them that they're being abused, because that's honestly like 85% of the battle, is just you realizing that you are, and like actually accepting it without immediately like talking yourself out of it. Took me a million years. Like that took until I was like 33 really, for me to like fully admit that out loud to anyone that really mattered. And so if this kind of stuff makes that a little bit easier when you're actually going through it instead of like 20 years later, then that's worth it. And that's part of why all that craziness was so weird, because it's like, do you know, they didn't know enough about us to know like why we're even doing this.
Yeah.
And they don't care. And so I'm like, do you know that it's like a personal thing when you make videos saying that I don't care about other survivors? Like, I am a survivor, and you made a video saying that I don't care about other people. Do you know how fucked up that is? To say that someone who went through that doesn't care about other people who went through that because she doesn't like a musical about the Odyssey.
Also, like we joke about how Percy, when he lost his memory, he remembered that he hated Ares. You would remember you hate Calypso. Like, I'm fully convinced.
Yeah, and also Luke. Like I laugh about this stuff, but um part of the fun of like re engaging with this content, like Greek mythology, I include in that in general, not just Percy Jackson, but all of it in general. Again, now when my brain isn't like trying to kill itself from like all the dissociation and all that, like I was for most of my life, is that even back then I was like, I hate you. Like I remember very clearly reading the when I read the Percy Jackson books for the first time, I fucking hated Luke. And as soon as all of that happened, I hated Calypso. I remember how much I hated her, that I actually remember things from these books that include her when I don't remember. Like, I know I've said this before, but when I read the House of Hades book, I don't remember anything from that book. Like, I remember that they went to Tartarus, obviously, and I remember how they like got out of it. But I figured out things that happen in that book from videos that I see people about it, because I don't remember any of it, because the entire book I was just dissociating because of how like triggered and like traumatic the entire book was for them. And so I generally don't remember anything at all, but I do remember that I fucking hate Calypso from the things that she does in that book and the book after that. And so it's like those things just like stay in your mind forever. And that's why it's fun talking about the stuff with Percy, to point out this stuff, to be like, yeah, this is why he always hates Ares. This is why he always hates the gods and always talks about them the way that he does, and just knows how to deal with them in that way, but also not listen to a word they have to say. Because he learned that from a young age too, and that just doesn't just disappear from your head one day. It stays there no matter how much you want it to be gone. It doesn't go away.
Yeah. Um, let's see. So we've talked about how we met. We've talked about don't want to talk about the subject that we don't want to talk about. Let's see. So how we kind of got into doing this podcast, and I don't know that we've also ever directly told this story, is we wanted to do a podcast just kind of centered around media and all of these things for all of those reasons you just said, about like how it's easier to talk about trauma when it's depersonalized through media. And so we just ended up pairing up, and TikTok was always the easiest way to do this, of just us both being able to jump on live and just recording. And we have found YouTube is kind of going to be our replacement, at least for now, just because we can use it, but it sucks your battery like crazy, even when it's on a charger, which was really insane to find out. Um, I don't know about the rest of our content though. Like that's the thing is I still haven't decided how I feel about content. I don't know that I necessarily want to do the emotional incest content anywhere else because it really would never be the same experience as it was on TikTok.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know that I want to do the analysis of Gilmore Girls ever again. Like, as much as it was fun while it lasted, it just, after a while, I did feel like it got old because it's it's exhausting to put yourself in a place where you're projecting onto these things, um, while also arguing with people about the characters. I don't know. I also I got tired of that in terms of Gilmore Girls because that was too close to my trauma at the time. And yeah, so I don't want to move a lot of my content. I still think I want to talk about mythology stuff. I might still talk about therapy and healing and all of that, but not in the same respect that I do in TikTok. It's really weird.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really weird. It's just like it's easy on TikTok to just like post like a video with just like words on the screen, where I just like say something about even Percy related stuff that I'm just like thinking about, and it's easy for people to see that. People tend to like it when I do that, and but that kind of thing doesn't work as well in other places.
Yeah.
It's just like it just doesn't work as well, and it's easier to talk about stuff like that in a way like that where you're just like putting it up there and not thinking about it too much, but it's like a way for people to like kind of get the idea of like your perspective on things or what you think about when it comes to this stuff. It's a lot harder to do that in other places, and I don't want to do like the thing I used to do when we first got on TikTok, at least the first couple of years of like talking about like personal life stuff like we would try, because that's what we thought we had to do. That was kind of like you with Gilmore Girls, was your way of talking about that stuff. And it's like we can talk about it and other things we care about in a way that's like safer for our own like well-being.
Yeah.
The Percy books are a good way to do that um because even though they can be very like intense and like triggering talking about that stuff, we also like take breaks between books for a reason.
Yeah.
So that we can just like ironically we're supposed to do things that are more like lighthearted in between the books and stuff, and just do things that we don't necessarily care that much about. We still think it's fun to talk about that stuff, of course, but it's not as like as emotional or triggering or upsetting or whatever as bringing up those sort of themes can be, or like talking about what those characters go through. Like even a heavy book like Song of Achilles, it's just like interesting to read it, but I don't feel like overly emotionally invested in either of the characters, and I'm not sure that I ever necessarily will. Maybe I will by the end of the book, but it's hard, at least at this point, it's hard for me to say. Um, but it's just like hard to just move that over to another place. And I feel like at least for us, like we can talk about this stuff in this way, in a way that is good for us to talk, and it's easy for us to talk about when we're just talking to each other and just imagining other people just like watching our conversation.
Yeah.
Um, that's like honestly the best, like safest way for our like mental health to talk about this. I feel like if you do it more than that, you become like I said, like almost like a sideshow character, um, where you like feel like you need to be like super trauma porn like in order to get people's attention, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I just don't see that it's helpful. Um, and so we'll figure out whatever else we want to do. We don't have to do anything else besides what we're doing
Yeah.
with this stuff. And But I think everyone is going to be figuring that kind of stuff out now of like, what are you going to make? Because it is one thing I've seen people say about YouTube, which is true, is that like you can't just put out like meaningless stuff there because people just don't care.
Yeah.
And like I thought it was funny when I watched one of those like YouTube like what's going to be in the algorithm in 2025, and they were saying something about how they're not like caring that much about like high quality stuff. It's more about like if you have like a real connection with your audience, and if you have like a personal like story or something like that that people can care about. I'm like, well, that's us.
Yeah.
So we did that well just by existing how we are as people.
Yeah.
Like
I
we were
like
trying.
I have to wonder if we've outgrown TikTok and outgrown it in the sense of where our personal trauma journeys are. And maybe you'll have something to say about this because I know you don't even really talk about it much. But part of what got hard for me after a while was the idea that I never intended no contact with my mom to be a forever thing. And because I had gotten on here and told all of these stories while I was unpacking my trauma, she became a cartoon villain in a lot of people's heads. And like I had to legit block people at some points of where they were pushing boundaries of, oh no, you should just say no contact forever. Like I still don't love when people say that, but if you say that more than once to me after I'm like, yeah, no, that's not the plan, then you know that's too much for me. But regardless, where I'm at in my journey is I do need to kind of figure out how do I move to a place where I can handle low contact. You moved to a place where you actually now are in contact with your mom. Your mom is like the dream fairy tale story of she actually worked on herself and she recognizes what she did wrong and she's apologized and is willing to talk about things. But yeah, like that's been hard to talk about here because there are so many people that just want to kind of dwell in the I'm mad at my parents part of this whole thing.
Yeah, and I used to talk about this more, but I do every once in a while, but not really anymore because I just don't want to deal with it anymore. Is there's a lot of people like the narc abuse stuff. I
Yeah.
say that like very derogatorily for a reason because a lot of that stuff is built around this idea of keeping you afraid just of something different.
Hmm.
And so instead of being afraid of the person that's abusing you, it now makes you afraid that you're going to run into somebody else that is like them. And because all of the like things that make somebody a narcissist is very like vague. Like I have had people accuse me of being one many times purely just because I didn't believe that someone was a bad person or whatever. Um, and I understand where a lot of those people like trigger wise are coming from. Like they because it feels very threatening when you're still like very new to talking or like acknowledging that this person abused you. So when you run into somebody that is saying, I don't think this person that reminds me of my abuser is abusive, they feel like they have to defend like them believing that their abuser abused them. Like all of those conversations, I would just end up saying, I knew the entire time that's what was happening. And at a certain point, I would just get to the point where I would just tell them, like, just because they remind you of the person that hurt you does not mean that they themselves actually did that. Like, you need to, like, be able to separate like them from how you feel about the person that they remind you of. Like I'm not going to accuse people who look like my dad or remind me of him and that just because they like tangentially remind me of him of being like him. That's just not a good idea. And so yeah, so when I the first couple of years I was on TikTok was when I was no contact with my mom, and then randomly like last not even last year. It was like August, like July of like 2023. We just like ended up being in contact again. It wasn't something I ever thought would happen, but it did. And I didn't think it would happen because the last time we talked, she was so not like that. But she's very different now because the years that we spent apart was like good for her to like think about that stuff and notice that stuff that was going on and just like acknowledge it in a way. And I'll be honest, some of it was just me like thinking that she knew more than she did. Like it's hard when you're going through that sort of a stuff when you're a kid. Every kid thinks this. Every kid thinks that your parents know everything. And I've realized since I've started talking to her too, where we sometimes accidentally say things that we don't realize is like new information for the other person until we say it. And there's been times where I've said things where I realized that she really didn't know or like fully understand most of the time of what was going on. Because the stuff I said was like more downplayed because it was too scary for me to say what was actually happening. And I was just kind of hoping that she would. I thought, like, I'm a kid, my mom will get what I mean because she's my mom, but I don't think that she ever actually did fully until I told her much later on. And obviously, she didn't react in a good way, but that doesn't matter anymore because she has changed a lot with that. And I talk about it a little bit, but not really on TikTok because I'm like, I don't care what you think. Like, genuinely, I don't give a fuck like what you think about that decision. It was a really good decision. Like every month since then, that's been a very good choice. I would never think that that's a bad thing. Like see I see my niece way more than I ever thought I would because we talk again. Um, I've literally watched like my sister like 6 months ago refused to let anybody babysit her, and we're still not seeing her very much. And now we see each other like at least like twice a month, and she's told like my mom that she can go and like babysit her, or if she needs to be out of school because she's sick, that my mom will take her, and she's okay with that. Like that's and that only happened from like months of being around her and her literally realizing like, oh, when you guys are here, you can help me take care of her, so I don't have to be the one doing it all the time. And she loves you, and so she likes hanging out with you and seeing you, and so this is like a way to take things off of my plate. Like my niece is like obsessed with me, and like and not except she really is. She says my name like all the time. She wants to be around me specifically all the time when I'm there. And so I can get her to like eat when she won't otherwise eat. And just little stuff like that. And that stuff never would have happened if I didn't like give my mom a second chance. And I just feel like it's hard because people see that as like threatening when they've got no contact, and it's like she said everything that I wanted her to say though. That's why I gave her another chance. Like I asked her to come back in after she apologized to me and everything, which I never thought she would do.
Yeah.
But it's like a situation of if it just doesn't. I guess this is like the reality of this stuff of like I could, I guess, not want to talk to her for the rest of my life and just keep her away and stay and just keep being like wanting her to be away because of the stuff that happened when I was growing up and stuff. But for me, at least, it just doesn't make sense because it's like I already lost like so much. I lost like everything. If my mom is here and all she's saying is that she loves me and that she wants to help support me and like anything that I do, like she always texts me on like Tuesdays and asks like how our podcast was and things like that. And asks me how you are every single time I see her and all that kind of stuff. And so she's just supportive of anything that I do. And I'm like, why would I deprive myself of something like that after like not having that for most of my life when I finally can actually have that? Why would I do that to myself just because like I'm like she's not the one that was doing like the terrorizing. And so I think it's worth it to let her back into my life. And I do think that's why we started just talking about other things on TikTok because I don't want to talk about that stuff with other people. I don't want to tell them about it. I don't feel like I don't want their input. I'm like I genuinely don't care if you don't think that I should be talking to my mom. Your opinion does absolutely nothing for me anymore. I don't care. And like it is weird that when you put that stuff out there, people feel like they can have an opinion about that. And that's just like, that's just not something you can have an opinion about when it comes to me. Like, to be honest, you just don't get an opinion about whether I have a relationship with my mom after everything that I've been through. And it's the same thing with you, that like I've always said with you, that I want you to feel like, I want you to choose to talk to your mom again because you actually want to, not because you feel like you should. That's like always the thing that I've always said to you since forever. Um, that as long as you're doing it because you really want to see her or feel like you could see her, not because you feel like you're supposed to make things easier for, you know, your husband and your son. As long as it's not coming from like a place like that, then do whatever you want. And
Yeah.
where mine came from, I did it because I just wanted to. I didn't care what anybody else necessarily thought about why I was doing that. And it is hard to engage in like trauma stuff in any way when you're doing that kind of stuff, because people feel like betrayed or something by you because you're not no contact anymore, or you're not even talking about them as if they're like not a human being anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's much easier for us to make this sort of stuff, especially because my whole thing on TikTok has always been that I'm like, I want to help kids that are like me, that like is growing up in a really bad situation, and we go to like fandom and media to escape and like try to understand it in a weird way, and also just like have a way to interact with like normal people and make friends in some way. That's like the way that we can reach people, especially online. And so I'm like, I know kids like me are out there, and I just want them to have something out there to show that what's happening to them isn't okay. And that's all I've ever wanted to use this sort of stuff for. And that's basically what we're doing now. So it's worth it. And it's hard losing an app like TikTok where like literal children can follow you there when I'm not sure that they would want to follow you anywhere else. Um, but ironically, there are kids that follow us on YouTube that are allowed to be on TikTok. So it might balance out.
I don't know why. Some parents are less afraid of YouTube. It's just weird.
Yeah, some of the when we made like our video about them wanting to put Percy on the banned book list, there were some kids in there
Mhm.
that were like 15, and they were like, "My mom won't let me on TikTok. How do I find out what's going on?" And I'm like, "We'll make videos about it whenever there's news. Don't worry. We're not going to just like leave you flailing in the wind." And they're like, "Okay." I was like, "You're so sweet." Like little like 14, 15-year-old kids just not wanting to not be able to read Rick Riordan books anymore. Um,
So sweet.
yeah. Well, speaking of that, one thing I wanted to do with this, because we, it's funny, we went into this like giant detour um, from Battle of the Labyrinth. It didn't mean to necessarily be that long, but we just like we're going with what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, but like one thing with it is, I think it would be fun for us to talk about. So one thing with like the people who shall not be named is that a lot of that stuff, those interactions, was us, or especially me, but us really talking about like narrative wise, like media literacy wise, like reading comprehension wise, like why we didn't like that.
Mhm.
And like to explain that we weren't trying to personally attack someone or anyone. It was just like, this is why we feel this way. And it made me think about how we talk about this different themes on here about Percy all the time, but we don't like maybe condense those themes. And so I thought we could try doing that, just because I spent all this time talking about that kind of stuff for something that I didn't like. It's way more fun talking about that sort of thing for things that you really, really love. And ironically, I think it's funny because of what people were saying about me, but I've always excelled at like media literacy, like reading comprehension stuff. Like I always tell people that when I was in high school, I got a 27 on my ACTs out of like 36 on reading comprehension. And that's like a fucking miracle because my brain could not remember anything.
Yeah.
With how much I dissociated on a daily basis, it's like amazing that I remember anything at all. from what I learned in high school, but I somehow still knew enough about reading comprehension that I did that well, even though I didn't know anything. And like, I one of my favorite books is Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I genuinely did not remember how that book ended. I had to go back like last year and reread like the last 20 pages to find out why I didn't remember it. And I'm like, oh, this is why I didn't remember it. But I generally didn't remember what happened after you find out that he's a victim. It just like stopped there. And that's one, but it was still one of my favorite books. That's just how my brain worked. Like I didn't remember why I loved it so much. I just knew that I did. So I wanted to talk about that again with like Percy stuff, especially going into Battle of the Labyrinth, because um, it is the book before like the ending book of the first five, and I see so many people talk about this book with like the first thing we're going to talk about with like Percy and Annabeth stuff in a way that I'm like, I don't think, at least from what I think is like the narrative themes and stuff, I don't think people necessarily fully understand all the time what they're trying to show. And I think that it's a situation of people read these books when they were young, and they, even if they're not young anymore. And also I feel like sometimes people look at certain storylines in like with like a YA like mask, even though these books aren't YA either. But I feel like they do, because that was something I see videos all the time about Percy and Annabeth in Battle of the Labyrinth, and um, a lot of the videos I see are people saying that Annabeth is really mad at him in that book, and she has like a reason to be mad at him, and that she has every right to be angry at him because she did something with him for the first time and like put herself out there, and then he disappeared. And then when he came back, he was like, we need to go like talk to Rachel, and they're just describing it in a way like Percy is like a normal teenage boy, and is doing like teenage boy things where he like is like playing two girls or like doesn't realize what he is putting her through. And I'm like, that is not this story. This story is a lot more like complicated than that. And so I wanted to kind of talk about the narrative of why Percy doesn't think that Annabeth wants like anything like that with him for a very long time. And it does have something to do with how I did not trust Annabeth until I realized that she wasn't the mole when they revealed who the mole was in like the last Olympian. Up until that point, I like wanted him to get away from her because I didn't trust her at all. I thought that she was going to betray him, and so I didn't want her to do that. I didn't want that to happen to him, and so I just wanted him to get away from her the whole time. And so then when I realized that wasn't going to happen, I was like, oh well, I guess they can get together then. And that's literally how I thought about it. It was like not even something that I thought about. It was not the reason that I was reading those books. I didn't care about that at all. I like actively didn't want it to happen. And the reason why I didn't is because I think that Rick did a really good job of setting up Percy as being an abuse victim in the first book. Like they tell us very early on that he was abused by Gabe. And that the thing that I always really like about, it sounds weird to say that I really like how he talks about how he was abused, but I like how he talks about that because in one sentence, he makes it not only obvious what the abuse was, but also that he was hiding it from his mother. And so those are like two things very close together, like that are very important because it's not only that he's being abused, but that he's not telling his mom about it, and so it means that he's not telling anyone about it, and that's a lot. Like having to hide that kind of stuff is a big responsibility. You're not a kid anymore if you're hiding that sort of thing from your parent. You're taking care of like their feelings at like the detriment of them. And so I'm like, oh, this is like that's just a good way to introduce it to show like how this is serious. And like at the end of The Lightning Thief, when he sees Sally like flinch when Gabe is yelling about Percy after the quest is over. And he realizes from seeing his mom flinch that Gabe hit her too.
Yeah.
He is 12. He is 12, and he knows enough at that point to know that if you flinch like that, it means you're being hit, because he's been hit at that point for many years. That's not something a normal kid knows. That's something that somebody who's going through abuse like that, you know that. You notice when people do stuff like that, but most people don't notice those like little things that people do. Um, and it's just like those little details that make him such a good representation, I guess, for going through abuse as a kid, especially his kind of abuse, where he's hiding it from people. He feels like it's somehow his fault, even if he doesn't like Gabe. He feels like it's his problem that it's happening because he doesn't like him personally, and he doesn't really have a reason necessarily to not believe that at that point, because that's just how people treat him, as like a problem throughout the books. Even Sally a little bit from when he was a kid and she had to send him away. Even if she had to, that still like somehow reiterates that feeling that he's the problem. And so I posted a video the other day of yesterday, is the other day, of talking about the one of the scenes I think about during season 2 scene, which is like the siren scene, but not the reason why most people want to see it. Because I don't think the siren scene is like a romantic scene or anything nice. I guess is the way that I'm going to put that. And the thing I said in that video was like, the scene that I'm thinking about is when Percy sees that Annabeth still wants to believe that Luke is part of her family and that Luke could be saved, which means that he cannot talk to her about anything to do with Luke. And I feel like that's something that people like skip over. Like they talk about how Annabeth sees him as part of her like thing with the sirens, and that she wants these people that she thinks are her family to get along, and that it's like a fantasy of imagining that. But at the same time, it's like that doesn't matter when you're the person being hurt by that person. Mm-hmm. And at that point, Lucas tried to kill Percy a couple times, even with the TV show. He tries to recruit him and then probably would have killed him after he tried to fling him into hell. So either version that you go with, at that point, especially in Sea of Monsters, they've had other interactions too where he's tried to hurt him and just says how much he wants to hurt him and kill him, not like just hurt him, kill him. Yeah. And so when you're being hurt by somebody like that, and that person is scary and dangerous, and especially the way that Percy talks about Luke in that book, he describes him as a feeling of evil. He talks about how terrified he is, that he's trying not to go into like a full-blown panic attack once they realize that they're on Luke's boat. Yeah. And that he can feel like a sense of evil on the boat of where Luke is. Like he like generally like has like a freeze response when they hear his voice for the first time. And he's absolutely terrified of that person and is scared of what he will do to him and other people that he cares about. And so when you're actually that afraid of somebody, when you see like one of your closest friends even if it's like a mirage sort of thing, still seeing them as like a nice person that they want to somehow save or like be around still, even if it's just like a thought that you could never entertain. That's the reasons why you never tell anybody anything. Like I didn't tell anyone anything about what was going on with my dad for a long time because people would like talk to him. They would see him. They would interact with him in some way. They would say things like that in that way where they didn't know necessarily what was happening. And this situation is kind of harder because Annabeth does know and she's still doing that. But there's a reason for that, obviously, that I'll talk about in a second. But either way, like you're being treated really badly by this person. You're terrified of them. They like haunt your dreams because you're so afraid of what they will do to you and people that you love. And when you see people willing to like listen to them or talk to them or give them chances. You that whenever you do that, like in general, whenever you do that, if especially the person is a child, you're like adding on 5 more years at least before they ever say anything to you about anything that matters. And and so like that scene happening, I was like, that's him realizing that he can't be honest about this stuff with her because how are you going to trust someone, even one of your closest friends, with that kind of stuff, with how scared you are of that person when they are hoping that they can like save them still and that they still see them as family at that point. It's just like that's you can't trust them with that stuff. It's too hard. And the story of with Luke and Annabeth, Luke in general is somebody that is like grooming minors, obviously, and especially with the story of Luke and Annabeth, the reason why Annabeth doesn't realize that like why Percy isn't like realizing what she's trying to show him, I guess, in Battle of the Labyrinth about how she feels about him and things like that. She, I think, honestly, doesn't understand what's going on. That she doesn't understand why he's friends with Rachel. She doesn't understand why he doesn't respond to when she does put herself out there and stuff because she is being actively groomed. Like that is why she doesn't realize it. She's being actively groomed by someone. And when you're being groomed and abused by somebody, they make you end up doing things that you would never otherwise do. And some of that time, that means that you hurt people in your life because you treat them in a way that you don't even realize is like out of character necessarily for you because you can't tell how the other person is manipulating you and abusing you and things like that. And so for her, she's just thinking like, I just want to save Luke because Luke was like a mentor to me, a dad to me, an uncle, whatever, like growing up, and I don't want to give up on that idea. Um, and she's being manipulated by him to make where, especially after the third book, to make her like have empathy for him when he doesn't deserve any.
Yeah.
And so that's in her head, and so she's like treating Percy badly, where she's not really talking to him, she's not telling him things. She's mad at him because she's friends with Rachel. Because I don't think that she actually understands that the reason why he's friends with Rachel is because of her. Mm-hmm. And because like what is he supposed to do? Like especially when we get to Titan's Curse, like the overall theme with Percy is that he's somebody that will do whatever to kind of keep everybody comfortable. Like when he sees that stuff with like the sirens and whatever else happens with Luke at the end of that book with Thalia coming back and stuff, he doesn't ever make it like a thing. Like he doesn't talk to people about it. He doesn't like talk to even the kids at camp about how weird it is that they're like comparing him to Luke. He doesn't bring any of that stuff up. He just kind of like deals with it on his own because he's an abuse victim. And he's been used to like hiding his feelings his whole childhood, so he's just going to keep doing it. But he doesn't talk about that stuff. He doesn't talk about how he's upset with Annabeth ever for how she talks about Luke or that she still thinks that he could be saved or anything like that. He just stops talking about Luke around her. He stops talking about, unless they have to talk about it, that he knows that Luke won't be saved. He just stops talking about it. Like he doesn't talk about it with anybody at camp either. He basically just like keeps it inside his own head. Like we read him talking, thinking about it. But other than that, he doesn't really talk about it very much with other people. Sometimes with like Chiron, because Chiron's somebody that would listen to him about it. But most of the time he just doesn't talk about it because he doesn't want to make everybody else uncomfortable. And that's, as an abuse victim, that's like where your priority is. It's not in a place of you saying like, I'm upset that you're making me feel this way. And it's not right that this person is trying to kill me and I didn't do anything. I was just born, and this person is trying to use me as like a reason, an example, as a way to show how great he is so he can take over the entire world. And I didn't do anything, but you're mad at me just because I survived the times when he tried to kill me. That doesn't seem fair. But he doesn't do any of that stuff. He just like Titan's Curse is my favorite book of the series because that's a book where it really like shows so much about that book. That entire book is him just dealing with a lot of stuff on his own and not telling anybody anything that he's going through, and people just generally don't notice. And I love it, even though it's upsetting, really upsetting for me to read because that was my whole childhood. No one ever noticed what was going on with me either because I was too good at acting like I was fine. Um, even with my mom, she would sometimes ask me if I was okay, and I would just say that I was fine. She could tell that I wasn't, but she like wouldn't push me on it because the times that she would, I would end up screaming at her because I didn't want her to ask. It was just better for people not to ask, honestly, because it wasn't gonna go anywhere. I was never gonna actually tell you anything. So like, stop making me feel like paranoid about how I'm acting. Um, so just don't bring it up because that's like the only thing that I could do during that time. But it's very similar to that where everyone in that book is using him in some way. Like Grover just generally forgets that he's a person for a while. Like doesn't think about how upset he would be knowing that Annabeth was just kidnapped and all that kind of stuff. And Thalia fights him. Thalia goes out of her way to say that she trusts Luke more than him.
Yeah.
And people talk about that scene. It's like a funny, happy scene, and I'm like, what the fuck? And it's just like that whole book is him just dealing with all of this stuff, trying to do the right thing. He ends up saving Annabeth at the end, and all she can talk about is saving Luke. She's trying to tell him and Thalia not to hurt Luke when he's showing up there to kill them.
Yeah.
And it's just like nothing like if you were somebody like Percy and you were abused your whole life, and then somebody close to you like Annabeth has shown over and over again that she prioritizes like Luke over you, why would you ever think that they care that much about you?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say that to sound like harsh or mean, but it's just the reality of like when kids go through abuse, this is why we don't tell anyone. Because every time you see that person or talk to them or hang out with them or anything like that, that is like a signal to us that you will not listen to me, you will not believe me, you will believe them, you're choosing them over me. So I'm not going to say anything. Like there were so many times when I was growing up that I wanted to say something to people all the time, like almost every other day, but then something would happen and I would just like not do it because I was never going to say something like that unless I was sure that they would actually believe me. Because it was way too scary to imagine what would happen if I did tell somebody and then they told him and they didn't believe me or they just told him. And so I was never going to say anything unless I was absolutely sure, which is why like people need to realize that about kids is like you have to like baby step them if you ever want them to listen to you or talk to you or tell you anything at all. Like people are very like CPS happy. And that's a weird way to state that, but I don't care. It's just a thing that a lot of people feel like if you call CPS then everything is like good. No. Like people could have called about my parents, but there was never any like official report or anything that about them. But it's also a thing of like even if you do, that's probably just going to make the situation worse for the child.
Yeah, you need to be sure that somebody's going to intervene if you do something because if not, it's just, hey, you're telling people, so I'm going to get really mad at you.
Yeah. But I was thinking about that today because that one family that became like a whole thing on here.
Jenkins, yeah, they kind of disappeared after like everybody was done roasting them. It feels like nobody cares anymore.
I saw a video today that they got evicted from their apartment because it was an apartment that was like that they got through like a program meant for homeless people. So it was one that was meant for like the husband and one of his kids, and they didn't know that they had that many people living with them. And I was like, that is like now all those kids don't have like a stable place to live. At least even if it wasn't how you would want it to be, at least before then, they had some kind of a place, like literally just like a place to live, like a house that they could go to, a place that they could close the door and know that like people can like not bust into their home.
Yeah.
And it's just like the bare bones kind of thing that you would want. And When I talk about, I like talking about this stuff with Percy Jackson books because Rick does such a good job of showing this stuff in a very accurate way to how you feel when you go through this stuff, because it does take a really long time to ever trust anyone. And honestly, like Percy never tells anyone. Like even up to the point of the books that we're in where he's like 18 and a senior in high school and about to graduate, he still has not really talked to the people around him about how they hurt him. And I understand why. I didn't do it until I was 33. He's only 18. Like, of course he's not going to do it yet. But it's just a thing of that he hasn't done it in those books. We know how he feels because he's the perspective, but he has never really talked to those people about how they hurt him during those years. At some point he will, because that's what we all do. And it's honestly like a relief when you're able to do that and tell them. It's hard, of course, to have those conversations, but it's worth it because you finally get to do it and get it off your chest. But I guess the thing with the whole storyline with like Percy and Annabeth and Luke is that like I have a hard time watching people say that Percy is the thing at fault, or that Annabeth has a reason to be really angry at him in the last book, because it feels like you're downplaying the fact that she's being manipulated by somebody who's grooming her. And to like acknowledge the fact that she is acting out of character. She's doing things that are very hurtful to Percy because it's important to her, but that doesn't mean that she's not hurting him, because she is. Like he spends the entire book of Titan's Curse doing everything that he does to try to save her, and when he shows up, all she can say is don't hurt Luke. I want to bring Luke to Mount Olympus because so that they can talk to him. That was just his plan to murder them all, because it was the only time they were all going to be in Mount Olympus together was during like the winter solstice stuff.
I want to take him to the place where all the people he wants to kill will be gathered all at once.
Yeah, and she's like literally like begging like Thalia not to hurt him, and is like scared that he's dead when she kicks him off of a cliff, and is like, "Oh, I know he's alive. Like I knew that you were okay." When he's talking to, and it's just like after all of that stuff, all she can think about or talk about is him, the person that literally kidnapped her and was torturing her. Like all that time, Percy was not eating and not sleeping because he was having nightmares about her being tortured by Luke, and he was terrified of what she was going through, only to get there and have her be defending the person that was doing that to her. And yes, that is something that you do when you're being groomed by somebody, especially like an older man like that you might have romantic feelings for, just feelings for, and they take advantage of that. But it's also a thing of, this is part of the story. You can't talk about how Luke is a groomer and ignore the like effects of his grooming on everyone around him. Like you have to talk about that, and by that you have to talk about how the way that Annabeth talks to Percy, especially in leading up to Battle of the Labyrinth, is not good. It's not. And like, yeah, you can say like she's being hurt and abused, and it's like, so is he. Like that's the problem, is like he's being terrorized by this person that you're defending. Every single time you defend Luke, that is basically telling Percy that you don't care about him, that you care about Luke more than him. And you don't mean to be saying that, obviously, but that's like how this stuff happens. That's what grooming like that makes you do. And one of the, we were talking about like the narcissistic like community, like weird like cottage industry thing that has happened on TikTok. A cottage industry is like people making something almost out of nothing, like little industries where you make money just coming up out of nowhere. And that's like what the kind of like narcissistic like life coach industry reminds me of people just like finding ways to make money off of telling people to cut people out of their lives, basically. But the way to talk about that stuff is like the reason why I think there are so many like narc abuse accounts and life coach adjacent accounts on TikTok or anywhere else for that matter is that after you've been in therapy for like a year or so, you get to the point where you start to realize that you hurt people. that when you were going through abuse or you were dealing with stuff, you also hurt people from the way that you were acting. And like, yes, it was because you were going through a really hard time, but you still hurt people
Yeah.
and you still feel bad. And a lot of people, when they get to that point, I think, decide that they don't want to be in therapy anymore because it's really hard to hear that about yourself and acknowledge it and deal with it. And so instead of dealing with it, they just decide that like their therapist is being like a victim blaming person and they stop going to therapy. They make up some reason about why they're not going anymore. I've heard a lot of them over the years of why they think they can just drop out of therapy out of nowhere. And then they just like pronounce themselves as like an expert after being in therapy for like a year, which is like ridiculous. Like I've been in therapy for 6 years and I'm nowhere near an expert. I would be absolutely terrified if I was giving people like any sort of professional advice about anything to do with abuse. I know my own life and I know a lot about how to like negotiate talking to people that are actively going through abuse where they don't like cut you off so that I can like hang in there with people and until they get to the point where they can like realize it on their own. I can do that, but that's not something that I would ever want money for. I would like it's making me want to vomit. Like imagining like helping people with stuff like that and like taking money for that. Ew, that's disgusting. Like I would never want to do that. And so anyway, I think that that's why people do that because it is a very hard thing to realize that even though you were being groomed by somebody, even though you were being lied to by them, even though they were telling you things to make you like believe that there was still some good in them when there never was and they were just lying to you the whole time so that they could get what they want from you. It's still you still hurt other people. Like Annabeth was still hurting Percy every time she did that. She even hurt Thalia, I'm sure, when she got mad at her for kicking him off of the cliff. Just like the best thing ever that anyone ever did to him. She still was upset with her for doing that. And like, you know, I'm and other things that I can't remember right now because I haven't read Battle of the Labyrinth in many years, but I feel like sometimes it's like this story is such a good story. Like it's such a good story of like an abuse victim and finding like community and like companionship with people. And then one of those people that he feels a big connection to being actively abused by somebody else and he knows that it's happening. He's watching it happen and he can't do anything about it. He can't stop it. He knows that he can't stop it. He knows that if he tried to like insert himself in it, like try to say more and do more, then Annabeth would get even more upset at him and she would just like stop talking to him altogether. And so instead he just tries to not talk about the things that he knows will be like too much for her when it comes to stuff with Luke. She gets really upset at him when Luke does horrible things because it feels like he's being like proven right. And there's parts in Battle of the Labyrinth where she says, "You must be so happy that this happened." And he's like, "I'm not happy at all." And it reminds me so much of the stuff that I like have said, that people have said to me, that I have like dealt with people saying to me for many years of that kind of a thing of like, "Oh, I bet you're happy that I know that this person was a bad person." I'm like, no, I'm not. Of course, I'm not happy about that. We don't want you to be upset, but we just know that it's happening and we're just trying to like wait until you figure it out. It's not because we are like reveling in it, it's because we can just tell. And we just want you to realize it so that it can finally stop. But when you're going through that, you don't want that person to be right. But they still are. Like, and that's like the whole thing with them is Percy was right about that the whole time. And most people didn't like really listen to him. And he is a good person. And so he isn't sitting there and being like, "I told you so." Like, all of you bitches didn't listen to me and all that kind of stuff. No, instead he like, you know, gets the gods to do something to help everyone else except for him because he knows that's what's really important. But it is a very like abuse victim story. Like that's what a lot of us end up at, like the cycle of figuring all this stuff out is it's like a magical version of that, of like going through the abuse, watching other people go through the abuse you went through and realizing that it's wrong, or knowing that how much they're going through but not having a way to like reach them or help them or anything like that, but like just trying to stick it out with them, hoping that one day they realize what's going on and they get away from that person. And then when they do get away from that person is finally gone, you use what you've learned to help everybody else around you so that they don't have as hard of a time as you do dealing with all of this stuff. That's literally every person that goes to therapy to work on like an abusive childhood. That's what we all do, and that's what this story is. And I almost feel like people almost, if you don't acknowledge the Annabeth side of it, that she is being groomed, but she's hurting Percy like regularly for a while. If you don't acknowledge that and just act like he's just a teenage boy and he's just being with Rachel and he doesn't understand why it's hurtful to her to take like Rachel's phone number and things like that, and it's like she literally is defending the guy who's trying to murder him.
Yeah.
Why are you upset about him taking a phone number? She is trying to defend the guy that wants to take him off of this planet. Mm-hmm. And has tried to do that multiple times since he was a child. Like, why does any of that even matter? Like, it doesn't. It only matters if you're not taking seriously the ways that she hurts him too. And I do think that it will be very interesting to watch this stuff eventually on the TV show.
It will be. Yeah, I remember reading it and actually almost low-key wanting him to get with Rachel after a while because she was being so mean.
Yeah, it's really hard with her in Battle of the Labyrinth because most of the stuff that happens isn't like anything that Percy could help. Yeah. It's not like he could help that he almost burned himself to death and ended up on Calypso's island basically in a coma for almost 2 weeks. And so the fact that he comes back from that and that she would know, because she knows about all of the myths and everything, that she would know that if he was there, it meant that he almost died. Yeah. And she's still upset at him when he comes back because she was on Calypso and it was like, what's happening? Like that you're like weirdly jealous of him almost getting his skin burned off by a volcano. When you're like trying to save Luke. Yeah. Like what are you talking about? This doesn't matter. And so I had the idea of us talking about these like themes because these are the reasons why I love these books, and I feel like one of the ways that like my autistic self comes out is that I just think that it's obvious to everybody because it's obvious to me. And dealing with all of the insanity the last couple weeks, it made me realize like, oh, this isn't that obvious to most people because I'm having to explain these like to me feeling like very like obvious like writing choices and things like that in a way where people don't seem to understand that that's what the choices were. Like literally having to like explain to people like this is an adaptation. If you adapt it and add things in that I don't enjoy, I'm going to say that I don't enjoy it because you literally wrote this and decided to add it in.
Yeah.
I don't care that there's like a lot of rape in Greek mythology. You are not like beholden to include it just because it's in it. You can decide what you want to include and what you don't. And that's like such like basic levels of stuff to me. But this stuff always comes easily to me. So I realized like, oh, maybe this isn't as easy to understand for other people, and I should make it really easy to understand and just talk about it all at once instead of assuming that people know what I mean when they might not.
Yeah, I think it's like what I guess the point is like we don't like the things that Annabeth does in the next book. We don't like a lot of her behavior, and we do recognize it's a part of her being groomed. But yeah, at the same time,
as an adult, when I think about that, I just think like I just want you to get away from him so that he will stop doing this to you.
Yeah. But
it is still very hard to like watch her doing that to somebody that is already going through a hard time because that has happened to both of us before. Like you had somebody in your life that acted like an idiot that did that to you a couple months ago. And it was very similar to that sort of a feeling of like I even had people that have like blocked me before on TikTok when I talk about like abuse stuff, and that it's just like too much for them how I talk about it.
Mhm.
And like I understand, like I hope that they're okay. Like I try to like check up on them later on just to see if they're all right, because I do care about them a lot and hope that they're all right, even if they can't watch my content anymore. But it is a situation like that. Like you, even though they're not treating you right, you still hope that they're going to be all right one day and that they're going to be okay. And you just kind of try to stick it in with them until it gets to that point. But it is, I think it is a good point to talk about that her side of it, um, because it just gets, it takes away from the story of Luke too. Like if you don't acknowledge how much Luke is fucking her up, you're taking away like a lot of the horrible like emotional mental abuse besides the physical abuse that he does to her when he's torturing her, um,
Mhm.
that he's doing to her, and that's like that's who Luke as a character is. He's the like 20 early 20-year-old guy that is grooming minors. There's a lot of guys like that out there, and he acts exactly like all of those people.
Yes.
It's exactly like him. It's kind of crazy. Like I know I made a video a couple months ago saying that like Luke is like this world's version of a school shooter, which he is. There was a school shooting in the state that I live in, and the girl that did it was groomed by a 20-year-old boy who lives in California, who convinced her to do it. And I was like, that's Luke. It's the exact same situation. She became friends or whatever with him online, and he convinced her to do it.
Mhm.
He told her to do it, that they would both do like some thing, but he never did his, and she did hers. She died because of the way that he was grooming and manipulating her to hate everybody around her that she already had problems with, because she was a 15-year-old girl and a teenager going through like being a teenager is hard even if you have like an easy childhood, and I don't know necessarily that she did, but still like that's the exact story that Annabeth and Luke is almost, it's almost the exact ages even. Like Annabeth's actually a year younger than she was, but that's exactly who he um, is somebody like that. And talking about how Annabeth turns into somebody that is so like mean to somebody that is going through, that she knows is gonna die and is going through a really hard time and all that kind of stuff. It, she doesn't have like the tools to like really deal with all of those conflicted emotions, so she doesn't know how to deal with it, but it is still a thing that's happening. And I think it's good to talk about it because there's definitely a lot of other people out there going through the same kind of stuff as her. And I think talking about how she's treating him helps people realize how they're treating other people or how they treated people in the past, and it makes them be like, oh crap. That was really bad. Or like that did affect me a lot, because in a way that I didn't realize at the time, because I thought that what I was doing was justified.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. Maybe that's helpful.
I don't know. But yeah, we're gonna probably touch a lot upon a lot of those themes, and then Calypso. I am still so disappointed we didn't get to talk about Calypso and Epic and or the musical that must not be named. And yeah, with that, like I am excited to be able to talk about her in Percy Jackson. I think a lot of the stuff that I was going to say will still stand. Um, but there's a big theme with, I wouldn't call it grooming, because I know in Percy Jackson she's almost written to be a teenager. Like she's written to be more, at least age appropriate in this situation, cognitively, from what I've heard. But there's still a power imbalance there when you think about it. She is part divine. She is, um, she's not mortal in the same way that he is. Yeah.
And like people say that about Calypso, but well, like you're thousands of years old, and like even if you look like you're a teenager,
Mhm.
you aren't. You know, like it's like how Artemis looks like a little girl. She's
Yeah.
not actually a little girl though, or like Thalia is gonna look 16 forever, but she's not. She's gonna have all of these experiences for thousands of years. That is gonna have her be more mature
Hmm.
than like a 16-year-old girl. And so that's like the thing with Calypso is that I think that Percy Jackson does well. That I felt like was lacking a bit in the other thing that Calypso isn't actually a child though.
Hmm.
She is like thousands of years old. She knows what she's doing. She just doesn't care. And it's like the little bits from the stuff with Calypso and Battle of the Labyrinth that I've seen just from in like people's videos or like a friend of mine sent me some when she was rereading Battle of the Labyrinth a couple months ago and was like, "Oh my god, like this is a lot worse than I remembered the last time I read this